always aware of your current position. I just hold out to the perfect condition. Coming alive. Heat of the night. Now is the time. Don't try to hide, 'cause I'm gonna harm you like an animal. I know you thought it was over. I know you thought it was finished. I know you think I'm
So with 2 weeks until show day, my energy levels are probably, quite honestly, last week they were probably at a 1. But this week, they're hovering around a 3, irrespective. Because my energy levels are hovering around a 3, my strength is probably hovering around a 3. Last week it was most definitely at a 1. So because my strength is at a 3 and because I'm 2 weeks out from comp, whilst I would love to really focus on strength performance and lifting the loads that I was lifting during my off season, it's just not feasible at this particular point in time, and it would be unrealistic to assume that I'm going to be able to push out the same loads and intensity. Consequently, I've had to psychologically sort of realign my focus from trying to lift those weights and trying to maintain that strength and realign my focus towards the higher rep schemes, the higher volume, establishing a clear mind-muscle connection and focusing on that metabolite work. And I think by just reducing the weight, really consciously engaging the target muscle, like today, I'm going through my exercises. I'm probably lifting a whole lot lighter than I'm usually accustomed to for all these exercises, but the rep schemes are higher, and I think just my concentration as I perform each exercise, I'm really actively engaging each muscle, and what I'm really consciously thinking of is actually when I'm on stage, I'm going to want to be able to engage these muscles, specifically lats here. So if I'm wanting to engage those lats and I really want to make sure that I've got that clear mind-muscle connection, I want to establish that mind-muscle connection here when I'm performing these exercises like wide grip lat pull down, or when I'm doing a row, I want to make sure that I'm actively engaging that lat, really driving it back and squeezing. Because when I'm performing, when I'm on stage and I'm doing any of my poses, I really want to make sure that those muscles are actively engaged, extended, stretched out and flexed. But in order to establish that mind-muscle connection, I need to do it here when I'm performing these exercises. So even with a seated cable row, as I perform the seated cable row and I bring this back, it's going to be the same movement that I do when I'm on stage. Is hitting those poses, activating those muscles. So that's something that I'm consciously thinking about in these last 2 weeks, where I'm not able to lift the same loads that I once was able to. I'm really just focusing on that mind-muscle connection, increasing the volume, focusing on the metabolite work, and taking what I'm using in the gym, because that's going to translate to what I put on stage. And I'm actually really enjoying it. It's sort of, I mentioned last week that it's going back to my roots. When I first started lifting, I was really focused on the qualitative rather than the quantitative. Returning back to the qualitative brings me back to my roots and my first love of bodybuilding in the first place. So this week's been a better week with training. All I needed to do was just shift my mindset and psychology and be content with the fact I'm not lifting the same loads. But that's not to suggest that I can't approach it with the same level of intensity and focus. I'm talking this week. Last week was an absolutely horrendous week for me, mentally, physically, emotionally. I was just drained, I was spent. My calories were quite low. We were really pushing the envelope with energy expenditure, like more cardio than I've probably ever done before. And more than anything, that was to make sure that I was going to be ready as early as possible, but I was at my wit's end. I was at the end of my tether, and I was actually walking into the gym and I was training, and where I usually just power through set after set, my rest periods were so far extended that my training sessions were just, they felt inadequate, and they lacked intensity, and as a result they probably lacked the productivity that I needed them to have. But we really wanted to push through until I think it was like Sunday so that I could earn my refeed. So psychologically I was like, you've got to really just push through this energy gap that you're dealing with, get to Sunday and earn your right for that refeed. And I'll tell you what, as soon as I had carbs, a higher carb intake on that Sunday night, I woke up on Monday and I just absolutely obliterated the gym. The last week has been absolutely phenomenal. My mood has been up, my training performance has increased significantly. We've reduced cardio somewhat, but even so, even when I get into the gym to do the cardio, my energy and enthusiasm towards it has moved from it being a chore to being like, this is a challenge that I want to take on. So it's a roller coaster ride of emotions during a competition prep, and you're going to experience these down periods. It's only inevitable that during a comp prep you are going to feel down at one point or another. I'm just happier that it was 4 to 3 weeks out and not like 1 to 2 weeks out, because now I'm about 2 weeks out from comp and my energy levels are high. I'm getting into this first set of wide grip lat pull down, and I'm really enthusiastically approaching each and every rep with the same level of intensity that I would during my off season. And I just didn't think that I would have this sort of energy at this point, but especially after last week. But it's the roller coaster ride of emotions that comes with a competition prep, and my enthusiasm, energy and drive, motivation to take on the next 2 weeks, it's absolutely sky high.
So, Robbie would have just spoken to you about last week's experiences, and the one thing that I can safely assure you when you deal with an athlete like Robbie is that you can assume 100% compliance, even if it gets tough, even if it sucks. And so last week, even though I was really pushing him to the limit, he stuck to the plan. To his credit, he stuck to stuck to his guns, stuck to what he had to do, and he did it. The only thing is, as a coach, obviously what I look for is what I call red flags, and one of these things that I look for is a sufficient amount of, for lack of a better term, engagement while training. So I guess the best way to describe that would be training arousal, right? And usually when you train, you get hyped up, you get pumped up, you really want to get into it and create some good stimulus in there and create some metabolic stress, but just wasn't happening for him. When I got him into the gym, I noticed that for the first time in about 8 years, I was actually training harder than Robbie was, and I thought, what the hell is that? When that happens, you know that there's something wrong. So I took him aside, and this was day one, mind you, day one of our business trip. Took him aside and we had a quick discussion about what was going on. I feel like he was just taking on way too much. He was just stressed. And as a result, he was starting to show some inflammation. He was holding on to water, and his physique just started to look a little bit watery and soft, or softer than it usually does. So it's just like, you know what, I had a chat to him, took a little bit of that pressure off, and it actually helped him. Taking the pressure valve off and doing a lot of that business work myself allowed him to sort of sleep and put whatever was left of that energy into training. And you know what, for the biggest part in terms of the difference, the biggest difference is visible, and it's actually visible almost overnight when he got home into an environment that he was completely relaxed in. Overnight his physique changed. He just looked like Robbie.
So look, when calories are scarce and you're reaching the final 2 weeks of your prep leading into show day, anything looks edible. So one of the things that I've consciously been thinking about doing over the last 12 months with my dumbbell bent over row is I have a tendency to rely heavily on my bicep in order to bring the dumbbell up, and I found that over the last number of years, because of my dependence on my bicep to bring it up, it's actually led to muscular imbalance and probably a lack of development in my lats. So one of the things I'm consciously thinking about doing with the single arm dumbbell row is actually dragging back. The first movement or pull, I'm consciously thinking about my lats rather than using what should be the secondary muscle to assist it, which is the bicep. So one thing that I would recommend doing is once you're in that position, bent over with a neutral spine, first active pull, just think, I'm really wanting to engage the lat and pull and drag back as opposed to pulling through the bicep. Thinking here, lat, dragging back and squeeze. The bicep used as a secondary muscle to assist the lift, not as the primary mover. So in terms of other qualitative factors like sleep, my sleep has actually improved this week. I'd probably say that it's hovering around a 4. And I can't believe that I'm actually saying that. Can I tell you, last week was absolutely horrendous. I think it's one of those things where you really do need to practice what you preach. I always preach about the importance of recovery. I always preach about the importance of the other 23 hours of the day that you're doing outside of the gym. But I don't always practice it because when you want something so badly, you're trying to do all the conscious efforts you possibly can to get that end result and put it beyond doubt. But often you can sabotage your efforts if you are trying too hard, if you're trying to do too much and jam-pack too much in. And I think last week after having a chat with Paolo, I made the conscious decision to check out earlier in the night. I am checking out early. And by consciously switching off rather than always thinking what's the next thing that I need to do, whether it's training, whether it's work, by doing that, it's just this reprieve. So my sleep has improved exponentially, and as a result, my mood has enhanced, and it's significantly improved my energy, comparable to what it was. Mood overall, better. I'd probably say my mood's around 3 to 4. I wouldn't normally say that 2 weeks out, 3 to 4, but I think I'm just in a more relaxed mindset in terms of, often you can get in your own head. You can get in your own head, especially with a competition prep, and you place the weight of expectation on your shoulders to perform to a high-end level. And I think for me, I was placing too much pressure on myself to perform. And I think that stems from setting a higher standard for myself. No one else but myself, but because I have that high-end standard that I set for myself, often I can set unrealistic expectations, which under the current circumstances, when your calories are low, when you're dealing with so much with work and training and everything else, you can effectively reach a point of internally combusting. But as soon as you release that pressure valve and you admit that you're not Superman and that you are human, as soon as I took the opportunity to be honest about that, I was able to get a more restful night's sleep, reduced my cortisol levels, my physique has improved exponentially as a result, and that's further enhanced my mood. So a lot can be said for having perspective, a lot can be said for really prioritizing things that often get spoken about like their rhetoric, which is, you know, just relax, you know, trust the process, reduce stress and prioritize recovery. But you cannot understate the importance of those factors in getting the result that you want. So just by taking a moment to compose myself and breathe, you know, my results have improved significantly, and I'm in a calmer headspace. See, if my hunger levels were at 1 like they were last week, I'd probably devour that right now. But at the moment, my hunger levels are probably at a 3. Look, I honestly feel as though I've adapted to the calorie intake that I'm currently at. We've marginally increased calories, but food is not as much of a priority for me or a fixation for me as it has been in the previous number of weeks. I'm not longing for food or conscious of the fact that I'm, you know, depriving myself in any way, shape or form. And as soon as food doesn't become a fixation and you're focused on other areas, you become less conscious of hunger. So hunger hasn't been as much of an issue. I think I've sort of just adapted to this is the current circumstances that I'm in. And with 2 weeks remaining, because the end is in sight, I know that food will always be there. So it's not to suggest I haven't had binge at all. And I haven't gone off track with my diet because I follow a flexible dieting approach, and I really don't have those hunger pains at the moment like I probably did a number of weeks ago, in terms of being aware that I was, you know, in a deficit, being aware that I was in a dieting phase. I think as you narrow in on a competition, especially with 2 weeks remaining, it's the last thing from your mind. You just want to power through each training session where possible. In terms of nutrient timing though, it's really important for me right now to prioritize all the carbohydrates that I have and partition them around my workout. And I've honestly found the importance of nutrient timing in terms of performance has paid dividends. So if there's one thing that I could suggest to anyone is finding out how best you perform when it comes to your nutrient partitioning strategy. I know that some people prefer like high protein, high fat prior to training and backloading their carbohydrates at the end of the day. I honestly perform really well with a substantial amount of carbohydrates in my body immediately prior to training, and then obviously having carbohydrates post-workout to assist with muscle protein synthesis and recovery. But I've honestly found that's helped me power through training sessions which I probably wouldn't otherwise be capable of doing if I were to have my carbohydrates at any other stage of the day. So hunger levels going okay at the moment. Energy levels for the performance that I want to do is going pretty well. But needless to say, I'm very much looking forward to the steak and chips that will follow my competition. So something that is incredibly important when you're going through a comp prep, I find, is having the right guidance and a sense of direction. Now, I've been involved in fitness 10 years now. I've competed since 2012, and I can honestly say that one of the determining factors in my success in recent years has most definitely been having the right guidance from a coach like Paolo. Last week was a testament to that. I was tired, lethargic, run down, and for someone who I'd like to think has got perspective on things and through experience has learned a thing or two in my time, you can really get in your own head from an athlete perspective, and when you do get in your own head and you lose sight of the big picture and you start to micromanage the tiny details to the point where you stress yourself out, you do need to have that sounding board, that objective mindset to pull you back into line, an empathetic mindset. And I think that's something that's been invaluable in my time since working with Paolo. From 2014 was our first time working together. It's reached a stage with our athlete-coach relationship where it's often an ongoing duologue, but when I'm emotionally, physically, psychologically, everything drained, just having him there as a level-headed sounding board at times when it's the most difficult, it's invaluable. It goes well beyond, this should be your training volume considerations. It goes well beyond macro manipulation. It becomes more a psychological thing. And if you can find someone who can coach you through those difficult times from a psychological perspective, you'll be placed in the most advantageous position to put your best package out on the stage. So last week, had I not had Paolo as a sounding board, I can quite honestly say I probably would have internally combusted and probably pulled out of this competition. We probably wouldn't even be recording right now. But fortunately, just having that sounding board, having that voice of reason, having that guardian angel has certainly provided perspective and allowed me to get a new sense of direction moving forward in these final 2 weeks. And motivation now to drive into this very next set.